What if everything you thought you knew about the Coyote Pass drama was completely twisted? Behind-the-scenes secrets, hidden alliances, and a backdoor deal that changes everything. Stay till the end because the truth will shock you. And if you want more real tea like this, hit subscribe right now because you do not want to miss what comes next. What if the truth behind everything that happened was never actually meant to be clear? Because from the very beginning, the situation surrounding the land, the conversations, and the decisions being made feels like something that was constantly shifting, depending on who was speaking and what they wanted others to believe. And that is what makes this entire story so intense. Because it is not just about property or money. It is about control, influence, and the quiet ways people navigate complicated relationships when everything starts to fall apart. And right at the center of it all is this moment where pressure begins to build, where Janelle is faced with a situation that forces her into a corner, where she feels like she has to choose between complying with Mary's wishes or moving toward a sale that could create even more conflict. And that moment is critical because it sets the tone for everything that follows. It introduces the idea that there is no easy solution, and that whatever decision is made will come with consequences that affect everyone involved. And instead of things becoming clearer, they actually become more confusing, because behind-the-scenes conversations begin to happen. Conversations that are not fully transparent. Conversations that seem to carry different meanings depending on who was involved. And that is where the idea of a backdoor deal starts to emerge. Not as something openly admitted, but as something that feels implied. Something that raises questions about whether decisions are being made fairly, or whether certain people are being left out of the process entirely. And as this unfolds, Kody becomes a key voice in shaping how the situation is perceived, because he presents the narrative in a way that places pressure on Janelle, suggesting that she's the one pushing for action, that she's encouraging him to move forward, even if it means forcing outcomes that others may not agree with. But what makes this even more
perspective, it becomes clear that this is not just a series of isolated decisions, but a complex interaction of relationships, motivations, and strategies that are constantly evolving in response to new developments and shifting circumstances. And that is what makes the story so compelling. Because it is not static, it is constantly moving, changing, adapting as each new piece of information is introduced and as each person involved adjusts their approach in response to what is happening around them. And within that movement, there is a persistent sense of uncertainty, because even as more details come to light, there is always the possibility that something important is still missing, something that could change the entire understanding of what has taken place. And that possibility keeps the tension alive, because it suggests that the story is not yet complete, that there are still aspects that have not been fully revealed or fully understood. And as a result, every new statement, every new revelation is met with both interest and skepticism, because the audience has learned that what is presented on the surface may not always reflect the full reality of the situation. And that awareness adds another layer of complexity to the narrative, because it requires constant evaluation, constant questioning, and a willingness to reconsider previous assumptions in light of new information. And that process of reassessment is what keeps the engagement strong, because it transforms the story from a simple sequence of events into an ongoing puzzle, where each piece must be carefully examined and placed within a broader context to gain a clearer understanding of the whole. And even then, the picture may remain incomplete because of the inherent challenges in reconciling multiple challenges, each shaped by individual experiences, emotions, and objectives. And that is ultimately what defines this situation, a convergence of competing narratives where clarity is difficult to achieve and where the search for truth becomes as compelling as the events themselves. And now you see why nothing in this story is as simple as it seemed. Shifting stories, broken trust, and decisions that changed everything. But this is only the beginning. So if you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the next reveal might be even bigger.
As the situation continues to unravel, the tension does not settle. It intensifies, because every new layer that is revealed only seems to complicate the story further.
And what once appeared to be a straightforward disagreement over property now feels like a constantly shifting narrative where each person involved is holding on to their own version of events and presenting it in a way that protects their position. And that is where the real intrigue begins. Because when stories start to change depending on the audience, it raises an important question about what is actually true and what is being reshaped to fit a particular perspective. And Kody once again becomes central in this evolving narrative because his explanations continue to shift in subtle but significant ways. At one point, he frames himself as someone being pressured into action by Janelle, suggesting that she is the driving force behind the urgency to sell, and that she is encouraging him to take steps that might go against the wishes of others. But then in another moment, his tone changes, and there is an acknowledgement that he himself considered actions that could be seen as underhanded, even if only briefly. And that contradiction creates a sense of uncertainty because it becomes difficult to determine whether he is reacting to circumstances or actively shaping them. And that ambiguity keeps the audience questioning every statement, every claim, and every justification that is presented. And within this uncertainty, Janelle remains a complex figure because she is not positioned as entirely right or entirely wrong, but rather as someone navigating a difficult and emotionally charged situation where the need for resolution may have influenced her choices in ways that are not immediately clear. And when you consider the personal challenges she was facing at the time, the urgency to secure financial stability and move forward becomes more understandable. But at the same time, her decision to engage in conversations outside of a structured legal framework introduces complications that cannot be ignored, because those actions open the door for misinterpretation, for conflicting accounts, and for the possibility that her intentions could be questioned, even if they were rooted in practicality rather than strategy. And that is where the idea of being caught in the middle becomes particularly significant, because being in that position often means trying to balance competing interests while also managing personal needs. And when those elements collide, the result is rarely simple, and often leads to decisions that are later scrutinized from multiple angles. And that is exactly what appears to be happening here. A situation where every action is being analyzed not only for what it accomplished, but for what it might have implied and how it affected the overall dynamic between the people involved. And as this continues, Miri remains on the outside of many of these interactions, relying on her instincts and the guidance of her legal representation to navigate a situation that has become increasingly difficult to trust. And her decision to limit direct
Moving, changing, adapting as each new piece of information is introduced, and as each person involved adjusts their approach in response to what is happening around them. And within that movement, there is a persistent sense of uncertainty, because even as more details come to light, there is always the possibility that something important is still missing, something that could change the entire understanding of what has taken place. And that possibility keeps the tension alive, because it suggests that the story is not yet complete, that there are still aspects that have not been fully revealed or fully understood. And as a result, every new statement, every new revelation is met with both interest and skepticism, because the audience has learned that what is presented on the surface may not always reflect the full reality of the situation. And that awareness adds another layer of complexity to the narrative, because it requires constant evaluation, constant questioning, and a willingness to reconsider previous assumptions in light of new information. And that process of reassessment is what keeps the engagement strong, because it transforms the story from a simple sequence of events into an ongoing puzzle, where each piece must be carefully examined and placed within a broader context to gain a clearer understanding of the whole. And even then, the picture may remain incomplete because of the inherent challenges in reconciling multiple perspectives, each shaped by individual experiences, emotions, and objectives. And that is ultimately what defines the situation, a convergence of competing narratives where clarity is difficult to achieve and where the search for truth becomes as compelling as the events themselves.
By the time everything reaches its peak, the situation no longer feels like a disagreement that can be easily resolved, but instead like a culmination of years of strained communication, shifting loyalties, and unresolved tensions that have finally surfaced in a way that can no longer be ignored. Because what started as a question of how to handle property has transformed into a deeper reflection of how relationships have been managed, how trust has been broken, and how each individual has adapted to circumstances that constantly place them in competition rather than cooperation. And as the final pieces of the narrative begin to come together, the contradictions become even more apparent, because the explanations that once seemed plausible start to lose their clarity under closer examination, and the patterns that emerge reveal something far more complex than a single misunderstanding or a simple disagreement. And at the center of this realization is the acknowledgement that multiple conversations were happening at the same time, some openly and others more quietly. And those parallel discussions created an environment where information was not evenly shared, where assumptions were made without confirmation, and where decisions could be interpreted in entirely different ways, depending on who was aware of what and when. And that imbalance in communication is what ultimately fuels the sense of betrayal that lingers throughout the situation. Because when one person feels excluded from decisions that directly affect them, it creates a lasting impact that goes beyond the immediate outcome and extends into how future interactions are perceived and handled. And for Mary, that impact appears to be significant because her approach becomes increasingly focused on protecting herself, on relying on structured processes, and on maintaining a distance that prevents further misunderstandings. And while that approach may limit emotional conflict, it also reinforces the separation between the individuals involved, creating a dynamic where resolution becomes more difficult because the opportunity for genuine, open dialogue has been replaced with guarded interactions and formal communication. And at the same time, Kody continues to navigate the situation in a way that raises questions about consistency and accountability. Because while he presents himself as reacting to the circumstances, there are moments where his own statements suggest a level of awareness and intent that complicates that narrative. And those moments are important because they highlight the difference between perception and responsibility, and they challenge the idea that any one person can be viewed solely as a passive participant in what has taken place. And instead, they suggest that each individual
interpreted in different ways depending on the perspective being applied. Because on one hand, she appears to be seeking resolution, attempting to move forward and addressing her own needs in a practical manner. But on the other hand, her involvement in conversations that occurred outside of a formal structure introduces elements of uncertainty that make it difficult to fully separate intention from impact. And that duality is what makes her role in the situation particularly complex, because it reflects the reality that individuals can act with reasonable motivations while still contributing to outcomes that create tension or conflict. And as the narrative moves toward its conclusion, the focus begins to shift away from individual actions and toward the broader implications of what has occurred. Because beyond the specifics of who said what or who made which decision, there is a larger theme emerging about the challenges of navigating relationships where trust has been compromised and where communication has broken down to a point where even simple interactions become difficult to manage. And that theme resonates because it extends beyond this specific situation and reflects a more universal understanding of how conflicts develop and how they can escalate when not addressed in a clear and consistent manner. And as viewers, considering everything that has been presented, the final takeaway is not necessarily a definitive answer to every question, but rather an understanding that the truth in situations like this is often multifaceted, shaped by perspective, influenced by emotion, and subject to change as new information becomes available. And that recognition is important because it encourages a more thoughtful approach to interpreting what has been seen and heard, acknowledging that while certain details may remain unclear, the overall picture reveals a situation defined by complexity rather than simplicity, and by human behavior rather than straightforward logic. And as the story comes to a close, the lingering sense of uncertainty remains, not as a flaw in the narrative, but as a reflection of its authenticity, because real situations rarely resolve in perfectly clear ways, and the presence of unanswered questions is often an indication that there is more beneath the surface than can be easily explained. And that is what ultimately keeps the story engaging, because even as it reaches a point of apparent conclusion, it leaves open the possibility that there are still aspects yet to be understood, still perspectives yet to be considered, and still insights that could further reshape the way the entire situation is viewed and interpreted. And now you see why nothing in this story is as simple as it seemed. Shifting stories, broken trust, and decisions that changed everything. But this is only the beginning. So if you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the next reveal might be even bigger.